Hello everyone, this is the finale of What If Naruto Was Abused and Leaves Konoha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
It was a warming scene to see Naruto walking through the village with Tayuya, the couple hand in hand. It had been 3 days since their return from Am and they had already been sent off on a mission together. They had completed it quickly enough, just a simple escort mission for some higher-ranking but paranoid official. Naruto had questioned the need for an A-ranked mission, but Gaara simply said the man had paid for one and they weren't going to refuse an easy mission that paid well. Naruto was more bored than anything else, but it had been successful, not even a bandit in sight. Now they were back and on their way to a training ground where they would meet Fu and Matsuri. The two of them were training the younger girls in preparation for the upcoming Chunin exams. Of course Naruto knew his little sister would pass it with ease, but he had to be ready in case it was anything like his were. He was going to be so proud up in the stands of the arena, watching her fight for her right to be a Chunin. A small part of him was hoping Gaara would let him proctor one of the stages, but he couldn't get his hopes up. It was usually a job for Chunin or Tokubutsu Junin. What were you planning on teaching little Minty today anyway? Naruto chuckled, still not quite used to Tayuya's affectionate nickname for Fu. I dunno, depends what you're going to teach Matsuri, I guess. Tayuya huffed with a smirk, wondering how she got stuck with becoming a glorified tutor. She wasn't really complaining as she and Matsuri had become somewhat friends, but it was still strange to be training a girl only a year younger than her. Well, I can't really help her on her affinity considering it's Earth, so I was going to try and teach her some broader jutsu. Naruto nodded in agreement, thinking about his own student. I guess I could teach Fu some more wind jutsu, they'll probably help her out a lot considering she can fly. Tayuya grinned, a mischievous smile overcoming her features. Somebody jealous? Naruto raised an eyebrow in amusement, chuckling lightly. Maybe a little, who wouldn't want to fly? Tayuya shrugged, somewhat agreeing with him. Personally, she liked the ground, a lot safer than hundreds of feet in the air only supported by a few flimsy wings. So what about you? How's that thing with Kurama you two have been working on? Naruto grinning happily, glancing back at the large scroll around his shoulders. Actually, now that you mention it, Tayuya looked to her left in shock when she realized Naruto had just vanished from her side. He looked around in surprise, blinking. Kami, damn it. I hate when he does that. Naruto stood tensed, feeling the rain pour down over him, soaking his clothes and flattening his spiky hair down. He had responded immediately to the tug on the seal adorning the back of his neck, only to find himself standing on a large body of water with the city of Omegakure in the background. He looked around in confusion, wondering why somebody had thrown one of his kunai here, only to watch in shock as he saw Konan looking at him with pleading eyes, a large pipe through her body. He could only look on in horror as he saw Toby behind her, holding onto the pipe with one hand, his body looking damaged and his mask broken. Konan saw him and with a burst of energy she broke away from Toby, pulling herself off the pipe and backing away from him towards Naruto. He caught her before she could collapse, supporting her with one arm while glaring across at the formerly masked man. Konan, what's going on? The blue-haired woman gritted her teeth from the pain in her stomach but managed to stand on her own 2 feet. He's after Nagato, he want to steal his eyes while he is weakened. Naruto returned to glaring at Toby while he began to slowly lead Konan away from him towards Am. Go. Protect him, I'll deal with this guy. Konan tried to refuse but her body was weakened by her injury and couldn't. He's dangerous, you have to. She trailed off when all 3 people realized something, the rain had stopped. They all looked up at the sky to see the clouds parting, a single solitary rainbow stretching across the blue sky. Konan's eyes widened at the sight, not remembering a time when Am's skies had cleared naturally. She smiled, taking it as a sign as she broke away from Naruto's arms. Thank you Naruto, and good luck. With that she slowly made her way back in the direction of the city, not risking using her dance of the Shikigami to fly there in her condition. Naruto suddenly caught a movement out of the corner of his eye, diving quickly as he caught the sharpened pipe before it could spear Konan again. He turned his glare back to Toby, who stood impassively on the calmed waters. Your opponent is me. The man with the cracked orange man just chuckled darkly as he stared at the younger blonde. It would seem so. Naruto cracked his knuckles menacingly as he removed his coat, instantly feeling lighter as the weighted clothing was removed. He did the same thing with his Junin jacket and scroll, placing both on a nearby rock that jutted out of the waters as he turned his attention back to Toby. The man had removed his mask entirely. Apparently it was now doing more harm than good anyway. Naruto was almost disappointed with what he saw. The mask had made the man so mysterious. Beneath it was just a man with a Sharingan. His left eye however was closed and bleeding while the right side of his face was heavily scarred and warped. Naruto put it down to something Conan must have done as he settled into his taijutsu stance, taking a deep breath. Toby on the other hand seemed unconcerned. Naruto didn't take being underestimated all that well. He charged forward at impressive speeds even Toby's Sharingan had difficulty keeping up with. All he left behind him was a stream of kicked-up water before he was already in front of him enemy. Toby didn't even move as he allowed all of Naruto's high-speed attacks to phase right through his body, none of them landing for even a second. Even though he wasn't connecting, Naruto maintained his relentless assault, not even giving Toby a moment to counterattack. Toby watched on with a raised eyebrow in amusement, not having moved an inch since the fight started. After about 2 minutes of this, his remaining eye narrowed and in a lightning-fast move he grabbed Naruto's wrist, pulling him up into the air before slamming him back down into the water. Instead of allowing his body to be painfully smacked into the sea, Naruto let himself sink underneath the waves. He just floated there for a few seconds as he tried to come up with a plan. Preferably he would have liked a bit more foresight before engaging Toby, but Conan had kind of dropped him right into it, so he had to make do. He grimaced before swimming to the surface, pulling himself up onto his feet as he once again took to staring across at his opponent. "You just going to stand there and do nothing?" Toby shrugged, once again annoying Naruto with how nonchalant he could be. Naruto tried to surprise him by suddenly throwing a kunai straight at him, only for him to allow him to phase through his body. He turned with a smirk to catch Naruto as soon as he emerged from his Fujin no Iki, but his eyes opened wider in surprise when he felt a searing pain through his back. Rasengan. Toby was launched forwards, skidding across the surface of the water almost comically before he caught himself. He stood up, grimacing from the pain of the attack, rolling his shoulders to ease it out. He turned to face Naruto again only to find the boy already in front of him, fist cocked back. He had no time to react before he was harshly punched straight in the face, repeatedly. Finally his senses caught to him and he activated his Kamui, but not before he felt suitably disoriented. He staggered backwards, growling as he clutched his face in annoyance. The blows didn't particularly hurt, but it was more a matter of dignity. "You are faster than your father, I'll give you that." Naruto's eyes just narrowed in irritation. He was still trying to work out how the man took a Rasengan straight to the back. Toib should be dead or at least paralyzed from something like that. But it's going to take a lot more than that to beat me. Naruto just nodded slowly as he once again settled into his refined taijutsu stance, summoning 3 shadow clones in the process. Good to know. He tried to be calm, but his mind was racing, coming up with anything and everything he could use to beat Toby. Jutsu are out, he'll just turn intangible the second I try to make hand signs. The only seal-less jutsu I know are the shadow clones and henge, not going to help me here. Maybe Fuinjutsu. I don't know if a barrier seal would work on him, and he's probably too smart to get trapped like hidden. I can't use the Fujin no Iki properly because of the water, and if I move the fight into the village it's going to cause too much damage. Naruto growled in irritation. He had never faced such an untouchable opponent before, literally. He was brought out of his thoughts when the air in front of Toby began to warp uncontrollably, only for a large black portal to open up. Naruto widened his eyes as a set of large shurikens suddenly came out of the portal at surprising speeds. He dived to the side to avoid them, but was forced to sacrifice a shadow clone as it dived in front of him. He rolled to a stop on the water, hurriedly getting up and looking around to try and find any other traps. Well, that was new, but I smelled him that time. It seems he has to stop being intangible to use any jutsu, including the strange ones like that portal. That's the only time I can attack him, but how can I get to him fast enough before he can reactivate it? Naruto practically slapped himself on the forehead in irritation as he remembered about his swift release. Now he just had to find an opportunity to use it. Toby didn't seem all that intent on giving himself such an opportunity as the air around him twisted again. Expecting another attack, Naruto tensed, but this time the portal simply expelled something into Toby's waiting hands. He was surprised when it just seemed to be some kind of large fan, the kind of weapon ancient shinobi clans would use. He didn't doubt its effectiveness though when the Sharingan wielder suddenly rushed him, bringing about the fan in a heavy downward swing. Surprised by the man's sudden burst of speed, Naruto could only dodge on reflex, but he was swiftly put on the defensive as Toby continued his assault. Naruto would back away, thinking he was safe, only for Toby to appear around him randomly, swinging the obviously weighted fan. Naruto would keep him in his line of sight and move away only for the man to suddenly release the fan, guiding it towards him via a chain that proved to be surprisingly maneuverable. Naruto suddenly found himself at a disadvantage both in close and long-range combat, unable to touch his opponent. The only times Toby was even tangible were when he was attacking. It confused Naruto as such a technique must be unbelievably taxing, yet he showed no signs of fatigue. Naruto decided that he was at a greater disadvantage at range and quickly closed the gap between them. Likewise, Toby retracted his battle fan, bringing it up in preparation for any attacks Naruto might bring. They continued their fight, Naruto trying to attack Toby while he just turned intangible, while he would in turn attempt to counter-attack only for Naruto to dodge with his lightning-fast reflexes. If anybody had been watching, they might have called it the most evenly matched fight they had ever seen, and neither combatant even seemed remotely tired yet. Finally, in a move of desperation, Naruto broke himself of his natural urge to dodge the weighted fan. Instead, he caught it, instantly regretting it. He felt his arm break in more than 3 places as the incredibly heavy fan smashed through his arm. However, it accomplished what he had wanted it to. It surprised Toby long enough for a second Naruto to suddenly appear out of nowhere, viciously cracking Toby in the back of his head with a devastating kick that sent the man flying across the water. The Sharingan user stood up in irritation as he watched the Naruto he had been fighting wave to him cheerily before puffing away in a cloud of smoke. Ah yes, shadow clones, Sensei would always use those in our training. He would let us think we beat him before letting them dissipate and swiftly putting us in our place. Something about humility or like it. Naruto just stared at the man impassively as he rambled, not particularly caring about how he was trained. I take it you didn't learn that lesson then. Toby just shrugged again, knowing it irritated Naruto to care so little about their fight. I was a different person at the time. He glared at Naruto as the two squared each other up. What changed? Toby smirked as he charged forward, battle fan at the ready. I grew up. He swung down, only to receive an all too familiar result as the Naruto in front of him dissipated into a cloud of smoke. However, this time he followed through with the motion, swinging around and catching the Naruto behind him with the edge of the battle fan. He clipped the blonde, sending him flying backwards as he smirked. Using the same attack on me twice. How unoriginal. He only saw the Naruto in the air smirk for a moment before it too disappeared into smoke. Rasengan. Toby looked up in time to see Naruto right above him, rotating sphere of chakra in his hands. He quirked an eyebrow up quizzically as the blonde simply passed straight through him, crashing into the waters beneath him. A few moments later, and a wet and soaking Naruto pulled himself up out of the sea, a look of irritation adorning his features. I really have to do something about his intangibility. He let his mind simmer on that as he produced a few shadow clones, letting them charge forward to keep Toby occupied. To his surprise though, the man let them get close enough only to open up a dark portal in front of him. Most of the cloned blondes were too surprised to react and were quickly diced apart by the shuriken that were fired out at incredible velocities. One however managed to dodge in time, and in a strange twist of fate he was sent stumbling through the portal by his own momentum. It promptly closed behind him, leaving a slightly dumbfounded Naruto and an amused Toby. The latter quickly pointed his battle fan at Naruto and smirked while the former growled as he charged at the man. The clone blinked in surprise when he realized he was no longer standing atop the seas near Am, instead he was standing on a strange floating platform of pure white. He looked around, seeing a multitude of other, similar platforms that simply floated in a large void of absolute black. It just seemed to stretch on forever as the light that illuminated the area the clone was in weakened the further he looked. Unsure of what to do with himself now, the clone sat down on the strange, cuboid platform. He wondered if he should dissipate, at least inform the boss of this strange place, but he wasn't sure what would happen. He didn't seem to be even in the same dimension as the original, so he couldn't be sure that the information receiving would work. He decided to explore instead, to see if he could find anything of use before giving the boss useless information. He placed a Fujin no Iki seal on the ground, not wanting to get lost or possibly missing a chance at going back. He suddenly had a thought and tried to lock onto any seals he could sense. It was remarkably weaker than what he was used to, but he could just about sense the original seal. He looked down at the marking he had placed on the floor and shrugged before hopping off onto another platform. However, as soon as he did so, he caught a flash of movement. Swiveling in surprise, he saw Toby back down on the platform he just left. Moving on instinct, he jumped at the man, rearing his fist back while the formerly masked man didn't even seem to notice his presence. He smashed his fist down on the man's face. He was actually surprised that he had connected, but not as much as Toby was. The man turned to stare in the clone's direction in shock, but he didn't seem to be looking at him, more through him. The clone thought nothing of it and began to attack him again, this time continuing to connect devastating blow after blow. Toby was trying to defend, but it was almost like he couldn't see the clone, which was confusing as the replica blonde could definitely see his opponent. After a certain amount of blows, Toby just grimaced in annoyance and suddenly vanished without a trace. Naruto wasn't sure what to make of what he was seeing. One moment he was attacking Toby while the man let his blows phase through his body. The next he suddenly recoiled as if struck by a powerful punch. Naruto hadn't hit him, and even if he did, the man was still intangible. Then it happened again, and again. Toby was slowly forced back as he seemingly fought an invisible opponent who neither of them could see. The strange thing was that the mystery attacker was actually managing to land his blows, not phasing through Toby. The blonde saw him grimace as he allowed his body to become solid again. Of course, Naruto immediately took advantage of this and pressed his attack. To his surprise, Toby actually defended this time, using his battle fan to block Naruto's hidden claws while at the same time he attempted to counter-attack. Naruto didn't understand why he suddenly had the advantage, but he wasn't complaining. He used his immense speed to overwhelm Toby, forcing him to bring his fan around in sweeping arcs just to defend against him. Finally, he activated his swift release, forcing chakra into his muscles and out of his tenketsu as time slowed around him. He rushed forward, noting that Toby's single Sharingan eye swiveled to follow him while his body was unable to match his reflexes. Naruto got in about 10 very powerful blows all across Toby's body before the man finally activated his ability, and Naruto simply passed right through him. Not one to waste chakra, he disengaged his swift release as he suddenly watched Toby begin to defend against phantom attacks again. This time Naruto observed, knowing that he couldn't hurt Toby anyway, trying to figure out just what was going on. He noticed Toby flip backwards, landing some distance away before he began to swirl, the air creating a vortex around his eye. Naruto realized what he was doing and quickly threw a kunai in his direction, but it was too late. With an irritating wink, Toby vanished. Toby appeared in his dimension, shaking his head as he wondered about what went on in that fight. He opened his eyes in surprise when he saw a streak of blonde suddenly appear in front of him, forcing him to lift his battle fan in defense. He skidded back a few feet when the violent attack struck home and looked up to see a grinning Naruto stare him down. Toby could only widen his eyes in surprise, wondering how the blonde could have possibly reached him here. "How did you get here?" The blonde clone just shrugged before it went on the offensive. It only had limited chakra, so it tried to keep its moves as least taxing as possible. However, that proved to be a mistake as Toby noticed the blonde seemed to be holding back. He capitalized on this, brutally and relentlessly bringing blow after blow from his battle fan down on the swift Uzumaki. The clone couldn't sustain this kind of assault for much longer and in a last-ditch attempt suddenly ducked under one of Toby's slightly sloppier swings. He dived forward and Toby, expecting another punch, reacted accordingly, pulling his body out of the way. However, he didn't expect the clone to suddenly latch onto his cloak, pulling itself in before wrapping the man up in its arms. Boom. Toby's eye could only widen in surprise as the clone wrapped around his body suddenly exploded right in his face. Naruto reeled at the sudden influx of information as his clone dispelled itself, rather violently. He felt himself blow apart painfully for a moment before it faded as a memory. He took in everything the clone had learned, and suddenly all those phantom blows Toby seemed to take made sense. Interesting, he displaces his body into some kind of other dimension but keeps his form here, switching between them at will. My clone could interact with him while he displaced to the other dimension while I could deal with him out here. He smirked at the stroke of luck, especially considering his clone placed a seal in the other dimension. Now wherever Toby ran to, Naruto could always find him. Then again, he didn't really want to risk teleporting to another dimension that seemed to have been created out of nothing by somebody else. The risk of getting stuck there worried him greatly. Dying of dehydration did not sound particularly nice. He wondered what had happened to Toby. The point-blank explosion should have been enough to deal with most people, but he had already taken a Rasengan and hardly felt it. For now he had to assume the man was still out there somewhere. However, his suspicions were quickly proved correct as the air warped and Toby almost stumbled into existence before him. Naruto observed him calmly, wondering why he would come back instead of flee and recuperate. Nice trick, Namikaze. Didn't expect it to be a clone. Lucky I teleported it away before it could do much damage. Naruto grimaced. He had hoped his clone would at least injure the man if nothing else. Nothing he did seemed to work otherwise. But now I've taken care of that little pest, how about we get back to this? Naruto just nodded before he disappeared in a flash of speed. Toby was nonplussed. Now that there were no clones in the other dimension, he could use his intangibility again. That was why he was surprised when he switched, only to receive a swift kick in his side, flinging him backwards as Naruto smirked, his hand in a signature seal. What? You think I would find that place and just leave it without a way to get back? There are over 50 clones there now. Good luck trying to get rid of them all. Toby scowled as he stood back up, deactivating his intangibility for fear of the clones that he wouldn't be able to see. Well played, kid, but I don't need that ability to beat you. Naruto just shrugged, finally happy to be the unconcerned one in this fight. He rushed in, slipping under Toby's guard quickly as he delivered a swift kick upwards. Toby blocked, but the force behind the kick lifted him off the water slightly. That was all the opening Naruto needed before he summoned two clones. They launched him into the air where he relentlessly attacked Toby, who could do nothing but attempt to block with his gunbai. The two landed a few feet away from one another, both still seemingly unconcerned by the energy they had been expelling. Naruto couldn't believe how this man had been fighting, yet he seemed no more tired than Naruto did. Naruto knew he was going to need something more if he was going to put Toby down for good. He paused, taking advantage of the momentary lull in the fight as he reached deep within himself, drawing on the chakra inside him. Alright, Kurama, time for a test run. He felt the great fox crack open an eye deep inside his mindscape before a vicious grin overtook her features. About time, Kit. It's been a long 17 years. Naruto smiled on the outside as bubbling red chakra leaked out of his pores, quickly blanketing him in a cloak of poisonous chakra. He felt the touches of his more malicious side try and break through, but with him and Kurama working together it was repressed and he was allowed to think clearly. Toby watched as three tails of pure chakra manifested themselves behind Naruto. Watch was all he could do as Naruto was there 1 minute, right next to him the next, already bringing his clawed hand around in a deadly sweep. He brought up his battle fan only to watch in amazement as it was neatly split into 5 separate pieces by Naruto's burning hand. He dived backwards, avoiding one of his tails before it could skewer him through the stomach. Naruto didn't seem to be done though, even as he watched the chakra around Naruto's body seem to be reabsorbed into the blonde. Toby hoped that Naruto was suppressing the beast within him, but was sadly disappointed as Naruto's skin began to flake off like Conan's Shikigami technique. Soon all that was left was a miniature Kyuubi made of pure swirling red chakra. Naruto's face was practically gone. His eyes were just 2 white holes while his mouth had degenerated into a jagged split. The cubified Naruto, still fully in control of his mind, grinned maniacally, feeling the rush of power through what he guessed he could call his body was amazing. He leapt forward, taking Toby by surprise as his body seemed to stretch in order to reach him faster. He found himself dodging claws and tails that wanted nothing more than to rip his limbs from his body. However, he did manage to surprise Naruto when he caught one of the savage blows with his right arm, seemingly not even feeling the colossal impact despite skidding back more than a few feet. Using that moment of hesitation, he smirked and punched Naruto right in the face. However, with the Kyuubi's influence, guiding him on how to use his new body, he quickly absorbed the blow, his head retracting into his body. It re-emerged along with a clawed hand out of his chest, taking Toby by surprise again before he was swatted backwards. Naruto grinned, loving how easy this all felt. He wanted more of this, and like that 2 more tails quickly grew out of his body. Bones manifested themselves of his body as a spine, and then a skull took shape, increasing his power greatly. Naruto roared out in delight and Kurama could only do the same. With each tail he felt her own power increase, her own partial freedom grow closer. Wasting no time she directed even more of her chakra into Naruto's body as he suddenly expanded, falling down onto all fours. Toby watching in mild intrigue as the bones that had surrounded Naruto like armor sunk into his body, glowing as the entire cloak took on the form of Kurama. He knew he had to stop this soon before he was facing the nine tails itself, but he could think how. Like the bones had before, muscles suddenly weaved themselves into existence as the eighth tail took form. Malevolent chakra now flooded the air like a mist, as the waters around them were sent into frenzy as if caught by a storm of titanic proportions. Toby was now looking at the Kyuubi itself, minus the fur, as two red-slitted eyes stared down at him while its now toothy mouth grinned in sadistic pleasure. At this point Naruto finally felt his own consciousness overshadowed by one much older and powerful than him. He woke up with the usual feeling in his mindscape, only it had changed. It looked like he was staring down at a miniature version of the battlefield he had just been standing on. There was a tiny Toby looking up at a nearly complete Kurama. The only thing stopping her from going all out was the brightly glowing seal around her neck like a choker. Naruto smiled as he looked down at her and the half-formed Biju grinned right back. How's freedom feel? Kurama stretched out like a cat might as the eight tails swished around behind her. Better than you could imagine, but it could be better. Naruto just nodded, knowing the ancient fox was talking about the seal around her neck. He pulled up his shirt, looking down at the complex and powerful seal that adorned his chest before twisting at the spiral in the middle. Instantly seals shot out from the center, extending up his arm in a black line of kanji patterns. He stared at his palm with a smile, glad that it had worked before walking over to Kyuubi. All he had to do was alter the seal around her neck and she would be able to channel her full power through him, and as long as the goals were aligned then it wouldn't harm him. He rested one hand on her back, stroking it lightly before he touched the seal around her neck with a single outstretched finger. Before he could do anything though, he was suddenly tackled to the side, forcing him to tuck into a roll as he glanced left and right to find his attacker. His eyes opened wide as he looked at the man in front of him, currently between him and the Kyuubi as he stared down at him. Long spiky blonde hair, flowing white coat with orange flames, Konoha headband across his forehead. Naruto just blinked in surprise as he looked up at the fourth Hokage of Konoha no Sato. Dad. Naruto, the younger blonde, blinked as the former Hokage extended his hand. He took it uncertainly as he was hoisted to his feet. Time around them seemed to just stop as Naruto gazed into his father's piercing blue eyes, so like his. Well, it seems the failsafe I worked into the seal worked, activating if you ever reached the eight-tail state. I had hoped not to see that day come. The older blonde looked around, staring at the semi-formed Kyuubi who stared back with narrowed eyes. I had hoped never to see you again, Kyuubi. The old fox huffed in annoyance, quite perplexed by this whole situation. Cheetah. The Yondaime looked at the fox in intrigue, noting the collar around her neck and the strangeness of the situation and landscape. Naruto was still frozen in shock as the older Namikaze walked across the miniaturized battlefield, peering down at the tiny Toby who was frozen in time from the way the mindscape worked. Ah, Obito, how far you have fallen. He sighed to himself wearily as he stood back up before turning to face his son with a warm smile. Hello Naruto, I'm glad I was able to see you as the man you grew up to be, maybe I should call it even because of that. Naruto was still in shock as he stared at the man, acting like it hadn't been 17 years since his own death. Dad. The man nodded warmly, allowing a kind smile to spread across his features as a tear rolled down Naruto's cheek. I'm at least glad you were told. I more than expected the third to keep it from you. He was the type to keep these things suppressed as much as possible. Naruto was still shocked, but he managed to find his voice. He did. I found out by accident. The Tsuchikage saw me and forced Tsunade to tell him and me. Minato looked away, thinking about that for a moment before he looked back with the smallest of frowns. I see. Well, I suppose he had his reasons, although I never would have wanted you to find out that way. Naruto just nodded dumbly. What do you say to your father who you haven't seen your entire life, only for him to come back from the dead? You bastard. Minato opened his eyes wider as he found his son's fist firmly planted into his stomach. That's for sealing the fucking 9 tails into your own son. He quickly glanced over to where the large fox had narrowed her eyes. No offense, Kurama just shrugged as she chuckled at seeing the man who sealed her get punched by her jailer. Naruto quickly turned his gaze back to the man in front of him as he groaned out in confusion and anger. I don't even know if I'm supposed to be happy or sad, or angry as hell. That village hated me, the only reason I'm still even here today was because I ran away, then I could finally find precious people like Tayuya-chan, Gaara, and Fu Imuoto. Minato looked away from his son, unable to meet him in the eye for a moment before he looked back around with a small smile. Naruto, how old are you now? Naruto glared back up at the man, wiping away the few tears that managed to stain his cheeks. 17, tomorrow. Minato's smile grew a little as he put a hand on Naruto's shoulder, glad when his son didn't flinch from the contact. I'm sorry Naruto, I know it must have been hard and I'm sad the village was like that. I had hoped you would grow up a hero, that was the life I wanted for you no matter what. If you had to find somewhere else to accomplish that then I guess I can only be happy. I have no right to act like a father now and you have no reason to accept my apologies but know that I'm proud for what you have accomplished. Naruto sighed, he felt deflated all of a sudden, empty even, all the anger had drained out of him. Naruto, I sealed half of the Nine Tails chakra inside of you because I believed you could control it, harness it. He looked across at the mindscape, at the Kyuubi wearing her collar as she stared down at the miniature Toby. I don't know how but you seem to have done that. He smiled as he looked across at Naruto, a fatherly smile that he honestly felt no right to give. I knew you would though because you're my son. He shifted his other hand to rest on his son's other shoulder, gazing into his eyes softly. I couldn't have done it alone. I've had Kurama with me my whole life, without her I wouldn't be the person I am today. Minato raised a single eyebrow as he looked at his son with humor. Kurama. Naruto nodded, wiping the last of the tears from his eye. Kyuubi, without her I would be dead. Minato seemed a little surprised as he looked across at the fox. She simply shrugged her shoulders, waiting for the two to finish their moment. You helped my son. The Kyuubi nodded slowly, she didn't really understand the question, of course she helped her container, if he died then she would have too. At least it started that way, she couldn't deny the infectious little knucklehead had gotten her seeing things rather differently. He's hard to say no to. Minato nodded curtly, not believing he was actually having a conversation with the creature he had sealed away in his son to protect the village. I know. Naruto looked up at him in surprise while Minato smiled down at him softly. I watched from inside you, it's how I can knowingly say that I couldn't be more proud of you, your mother would be too. He smirked in amusement, you recreated the Rasengan and Hiraishin without anybody teaching you, you really are my son you know. Naruto finally managed a smile as he looked up at his father. I was supposed to come here if the seal was breaking but that doesn't seem to be a problem anymore. He looked down at his hand which was slowly fading away. My time is nearly up and my chakra is almost gone. He reached forward and pulled his son into a tight embrace. I'll always be proud of you Naruto, remember that. With that his entire body slowly began to fade away, soon enough he was gone and Naruto was left standing alone, until Kyuubi coughed. Are you okay? Naruto remained quiet for a moment before he looked up with a smirk. Yeah, come on, we need to kick that guy's ass. Toby had seen the Kyuubi pause for a second like it was thinking, only for it to suddenly grin menacingly. Its whole body shivered as his lowered its body towards the ground. He watched in fear and fascination as fur began to sprout over its body. It didn't take long and shortly he was standing in front of the fully regenerated Kyuubi no Yoko in all her glory. She finally got to her feet properly as she closed her eyes in bliss, taking a deep breath of sea air before opening her red-slitted eyes and staring right at Toby. You smell of Uchiha and you wield the Sharingan. She chuckled darkly as she brought her snout down so close it was only inches away from Toby's body, he could feel each breath that washed over his form. For that you have to die. Toby blinked. For the first time in a very long time he felt fear. Staring into the face of the most powerful being on the planet would do that to you. His eyes widened in surprise as he jumped backwards, narrowly avoiding the tail that would have swatted him all the way to Water Country. Unfortunately for him there were 8 others and each began its individual assault in perfect coordination with the others. Kyuubi didn't even have to move as she let her tails keep the Uchiha busy, she actually yawned at one point. She had at least hoped for a challenge like from the last Uchiha she faced in the flesh but this one was nowhere near Madara's level. She stared at him again only noticing in time as his single Sharingan eye began to spin hypnotically. Toby grinned but quickly put all his concentration into subduing the massive chakra construct. His Sharingan eye blazed wildly as he tried to take over the great beast's mind, watching as her red-slitted eyes flashed between that and a faux Sharingan. He was surprised then when the great fox shook her head madly, growling in irritation as the control fell away, revealing a very angry Kyuubi. You were the one that controlled me that night. She growled lowly as she bared her teeth in a mix between a snarl and a grin. I had hoped you were still alive. Toby widened his eyes in shock as he tried to warp away, only to be struck hard as the Kyuubi smashed him down into the water with her tail. She didn't stop there though. She reached her hand under the waters and grabbed the slippery Uchiha, bringing him back up so he could look directly into her enraged eyes. Would release. Native Ugush, Kyuubi grinned sadistically as she increased the pressure of her hand, closing it around Toby in a fist as she squeezed. The Uchiha wasn't able to do anything except squirm as she held him there, slowly squeezing the life out of him. He grimaced, thinking of all the things he had yet to do. He couldn't die here yet. Kyuubi grinned one last time before she firmly clenched her fist shut. She would have preferred a more drawn-out death for the man that had the audacity to control her, but being here in this form was taxing on both her and Naruto. She snorted in disgust at how easily the Uchiha was beaten before allowing his body to fall limply into the water below them. She sighed, breathing in the sweet air again before smiling sadly, a strange sight on such a massive fox. Her body glowed for a moment as it became a swirling vortex of chakra that compressed down into a vaguely humanoid shape. As it became more defined, blonde hair appeared before the rest of Naruto materialized, panting atop the water. Man, we gotta work on that, it's way too tiring. He felt a nod of approval from Kyuubi and he chuckled to himself. She would do anything to have more moments of freedom like that. He stood up, his face becoming a mask of seriousness as he stared at the broken body of Toby floating in the water in front of him. Idly he noticed that it had begun to rain again sometime between him letting Kyuubi take over and her finishing off Toby. He walked across the water, really starting to feel the fatigue of having that much chakra forced through his body as a conduit. He narrowed his eyes as he looked down at the crumpled Uchiha, nudging him with a foot. Why did Dad call him Obito? He ignored it and pushed the man onto his back, only to jump back in surprise as he leapt to his feet, swinging for Naruto. The blonde dodged and stared at the man incredulously, wondering what it took to kill this guy. He noticed that both of his eyes were now closed, the right one bleeding slightly. I can't die yet. I will realize Madara-sama's plans. The world must know peace. I will. He was cut off as he brought his hands up to his throat, feeling the three-pronged kunai lodged there. He would have blinked in surprise if either of his eyes were still working, but all he could do was splutter and choke on his own blood before falling back into the water, dead for good this time. Naruto stared down at his body as the man's blood slowly spilled out into the sea, staining it red around his body. Shut up. Konan gasped in surprise when she saw a tired and sopping wet Naruto stumble into the tower. She left Nagato's side for a moment to rush over and help him walk the rest of the way. She carefully laid him down on another bed as Nagato looked up from his own to see the blonde weakly smile at the blue-haired woman. I got him, Konan-chan. After that he had difficulty keeping his eyes open and allowed sleep to finally overcome his body, letting it wash him away into sweet unconsciousness. Konan smiled as she stared down at the sleeping boy, wiping the locks of hair from his eyes before pulling a blanket over his body. She stood up with some difficulty, clutching her side in pain as she carefully walked over to Nagato and sat herself down on the side of his bed. He had recovered well in the last 3 days, without the chakra receivers his body had begun to fill out again to more healthy standards. Tomorrow Konan had been hoping to try and get him to take his first steps in over 10 years. He had talked more as well, mostly about Naruto of course, but Konan didn't mind. The cold empty person he had become was slowly beginning to recede. Every day she caught more glimpses of the man he had once been, the man that Yahiko had called his friend. He really did it. Konan just nodded. Naruto being alive was all the proof she needed that the boy had done what he said he did, what she could not. Nagato smiled warmly as he rested his head back on the bed and stared up at the ceiling. Incredible, he truly is powerful. I only wish we had met on better terms. Konan smiled as well. It doesn't matter, he saved you from yourself, gave you a second chance. She looked down to the now bandaged wound on her stomach, gave us all a second chance. Nagato nodded with a smile, something that had been happening more ever since Naruto had come into their lives. So the Akatsuki is finished. Maybe it's for the best, it was nothing like Yahiko wanted anyway. Conan nodded again as Nagao sighed, turning back to face Naruto as he propped himself up on his arms with a little difficulty. I only wish I could do something about all the misery we caused. Conan's smile turned sad as she placed her hand on Nagato's shoulder. She was a little shocked when he tried to maneuver himself around into a sitting position, still propped up by his arms. Conan, help me for a moment. She was uncertain, but when she saw the determined look in Nagato's eyes that had been missing for too long, she just nodded firmly. She hefted the still rather frail man onto his feet, using herself as a brace even though it caused her to wince. Nagato was unsteady on his feet like a baby learning to walk for the first time, but with a few small and careful steps they covered the distance to Naruto's bed. Nagato stared down at the other Uzumaki with a small smile, placing a hand across the blonde's chest. Thank you for everything, cousin, you will succeed where I failed. Both Gaara and Tayuya were sitting in his office, both anxious at the revelation that Naruto had disappeared. At first the redhead had thought it was some kind of joke or that he had flashed ahead to the training ground. However, she had begun to worry when he wasn't there, Fu saying she hadn't seen him at all. That worry only increased when he remained absent or the entire day, not even coming home to sleep. She wondered where he had gone and what was keeping him, and despite knowing just how powerful he was, she feared the worst. They had thought it best to not inform Fu in case it was nothing, simply saying Naruto was away on a mission. Yet here they were, a whole day later, and there was no sign of the unpredictable blonde leading them both to the situation they were in. Tayuya nervously paced the floor of the office while Gaara went through the small stack of paperwork on his desk, masking his own worry behind professionalism and calm. How can you be so fucking normal? Naruto's gone and we have no idea where the hell he's fucking gone, and you just sit there doing calmly forsaken paperwork. Gaara sighed as he paced down the mission report in his hand, looking up at Tayuya with weary but understanding eyes. Tayuya, as much as it pains me to say it, I'm the Kazekage. The whole village doesn't grind to a halt because one shinobi goes missing, no matter how important. However, Naruto is my best friend, that is why I trust in his abilities to get back to us safely. Tayuya glared at him, but he kept his own gaze even and neutral until she huffed in irritation, flopping down onto the couch Gaara kept for visitors or when Matsuri came to talk with him while he worked. They were waiting for another 15 minutes in near silence, only the occasional sound of Gaara stamping a document could be heard echoing through the small room. So of course when a slightly sleepy Naruto suddenly appeared in the middle of the room, neither of them really knew what to do. Naruto. He was suddenly tackled across the room by a red blur, strangely reminiscent of the first time he had reunited with her in this office. He smiled sheepishly up at Tayuya's rather flustered face, and he would have rubbed the back of his head, but Tayuya's legs were doing an effective job or pinning his arms to his sides. She smiled back before punching him in the face, hard. You asshole, what the fuck's your problem flashing off like that? Naruto groaned as he was unable to rub his cheek. Tayuya could really pack a punch when she wanted to, and he was feeling that now. Sorry Tayuya, I'll explain everything, I swear. Tayuya just nodded with a huff. You fucking better. 3 months later, Naruto happily jumped across the rooftops of Sunagakure, the biggest grin of his life on his face as he literally cartwheeled through the air. He was more nervous than he had ever been in his life, yet at the same time strangely exhilarated. He had reason to be after all. He flipped through the air, grabbing onto a banister as he spanned through an elderly couple's apartment, muttering a hurried apology before racing on. He dashed through the streets, dodging and weaving between equally annoyed and surprised villagers and shinobi alike. He ignored them all, to focus on his destination as he skidded around another corner. He flipped over a surprised blonde and puppeteer who watched the ecstatic Uzumaki curiously as he rushed off down the street at speeds hard to follow with the eye alone. I wonder what's got Naruto in such a rush. Temari just smirked knowingly as she pulled her brother along. You'll find out later. It's about time, you moron. She followed him with her eyes until he was around the corner, returning to the message she was writing to a certain lazy pineapple. Tayuya was running through some advanced katas with Matsuri. Just because the girl had made it to Chunin didn't mean the two didn't enjoy training together anymore. Fu was also there, but more as an observer. She also wore her Chunin vest with pride, even if she had modified it a bit to hug her more pronounced curves a bit more. Naruto had been so proud of her that day. She had never felt better in her life. Tayuya was about to continue the training session when Naruto dropped down from the sky in the middle of them, creating a small crater on impact. He was another person who hadn't given up on training just because things had quietened down. In fact, with more time than ever he had thrown himself into missions and training like no tomorrow. His speed was unbelievable as well as unmatched. Hey Tayuya, how about a spar? The redhead raised an eyebrow in amusement. Naruto hadn't asked her for a spar in ages, definitely not after defeating Toby. That wasn't saying he would ever unleash the full power of the QB on her, but still, he was damn powerful. Of course Tayuya just smirked, her own stubbornness getting in the way of rational thinking, again. Sure, you're on shithead. Naruto just grinned excitedly, making Tayuya wonder what had him so happy. Capitalizing on what she assumed was a moment of distraction, she pulled out her flute, intent on showing Naruto that despite how powerful he had become, she could still put him down with a single note. Of course she could only look down in annoyance when she realized our flute was no longer in her hands. She growled as she turned around, seeing Naruto whistling innocently while twirling her flute in between his fingers. She growled while he smirked before he suddenly saluted and disappeared, only leaving behind a brief after image of his smirking face. Tayuya narrowed her eyes as she glanced around looking for where the next attack would come from, not that she would even be able to see it if Naruto went full out. She didn't take kindly to being taken fun of in a spar, which is why when she saw Naruto's grinning face disappear around a corner into the streets she immediately took chase. Fu and Matsuri were just left in shock at the very sudden and fast turn of events. Tayuya chased the grinning blonde relentlessly through the streets of Suna, and if she had been in a less irritated state of mind she might have realized that Naruto wasn't using his full speed to escape her. She paid that no mind and chased after him anyway, her own smirk beginning to form as she found enjoyment in the chase. Naruto led her on a random and winding path through the village until he finally stopped on top of the Kazekage Tower, the tallest building in the village. When she finally caught up she was surprised to find him just sitting on the edge of the roof, lazily swinging his legs back and forth over the side, staring down at the simple flute in his hands. Tayuya landed next to him in a fighting stance with her bow staff out and at the ready. However, when she saw Naruto wasn't going to fight she frowned and sat down next to him. She watched him curiously for a bit as he played with the simple metal rod, spinning it in his hands as it caught the light of the sun that was just now beginning to set. You remember when I bought this for you? Tayuya raised an eyebrow at his slightly subdued and quiet tone, far from the normal way the exuberant blonde spoke. Yeah, it was about 9 years ago at that shop. Why? Naruto just smiled softly as he held up the flute in the light, admiring it. In all the years Tayuya had it she had never let it get damaged too much, and if it was she would immediately fix it, bringing it back to as good as new. That was the first time I ever saw you cry. Tayuya huffed, not explicitly admitting that he was telling the truth. So what? He turned to her and chuckled as he passed her the flute. She accepted it but maintained her curious and slightly weirded out look as she watched Naruto. I think that was the first real time you ever let me in, emotionally. Tayuya just nodded uncertainly, not really sure where Naruto was going with all this. He seemed so out of character today. What about it? Naruto chuckled again as he placed an arm around the redhead's shoulders, pulling her in closer to him. Do you always have to be so hostile? Tayuya smirked as she allowed herself to be pulled in, resting her head on his shoulder so that her long hair drifted down both of their backs. I do when you act fucking weird like this shithead. He just nodded with a warm smile as he rested his head on top of hers, letting them both look out at the horizon in comfort to watch the sun set. You still gonna keep calling me that then? Tayuya laughed, a soft tinkling sound that only made Naruto's grin brighter. You gonna keep asking? He just sighed happily as he continued to watch the sun set, setting the sky ablaze with various colors that made this time so special in Suna. He was sure there were other couples out there tonight, watching the same sunset with their loved ones, except he didn't care because he got to be with the girl that he loved. No, I think I know better now. Tayuya just nodded her approval happily before snuggling into Naruto's shoulder, stealing his boundless warmth away. So what did you really get me all the way out here for, shithead? As much as I enjoy being with you, I'm not exactly the mushy type who watches sunsets for fun. Naruto just grinned as he leaned back, pulling Tayuya with him until she was sat on his lap, surprising the redhead. I know, don't worry, it's important. Tayuya looked at him with a smirk. Oh, so there's a thing now. Naruto just nodded with a grin, throwing the redhead off a little as she suddenly became very curious. Alright, I'll bite, what is it? Naruto's grin settled down for a moment as he instead took to just looking at Tayuya's lovingly. His head was angled in such a way that the setting sun framed his hair, almost setting it afire in the evening light. Marry me. Tayuya just blinked in surprise for a moment as she stared at her boyfriend incredulously. What? Naruto just leaned in a little closer, their faces now only a few inches apart. Marry me. Tayuya just gulped as she processed what he was saying. But, there are things, and then but we have to, and then there's. Naruto quickly cut off her ramblings with a kiss, sealing them together at the lips as Tayuya just let herself go, melting into the contact as she closed her eyes. When the two finally parted, Tayuya was still leaning towards him with her eyes closed, a smile now on her face. Okay. It was Naruto's turn to pause in surprise as he looked at Tayuya in wonder. It only lasted for a moment before an enormous grin split his face as he dived on Tayuya, kissing her again and again to show her his gratitude. Tayuya was more than happy to accept them as she giggled every time a kiss would just miss her lips. That reaffirmed it in her mind, she would marry Naruto. No, she wanted to marry Naruto. He was the first person she had let into her heart and she wanted him to be the last to ever leave it. Suddenly she pulled away, leaving a surprised and pouting Naruto. Hey, aren't you supposed to get me a ring or something? She said it while trying to maintain a straight face, but she couldn't help the slight grin that spread across her face. Oh right. Tayuya might have chuckled at the scene if she wasn't so captivated. Naruto quickly began to fumble around in his pockets before finally withdrawing a small, simple velvet box. He offered it over to Tayuya, who took it hesitantly, almost reverently before opening it. She couldn't help the gasp that escaped her lips as she stared down with wonder at the ring carefully laid inside the box. It was patterned in a way that made it look like 3 different bands of brilliant white gold that wove hypnotically around one another in a perfect circle. On the top, in between 3 of the weaves, were 3 simple, but beautifully cut diamonds that sparkled dazzlingly in the setting sunlight. Tayuya just gawked at the beautiful ring, too startled to say anything. Is it okay? Do you like it? She managed to look up long enough to see Naruto staring across at her nervously, worried that she might not like it. The clerk said that if he even showed that ring to a woman she would marry him, but Naruto had been skeptical how a simple piece of metal could do that. Tayuya simple gawked some more as Naruto's unease increased the longer the silence went on. How did you afford this? Naruto shrugged, still a little cautious in fear of Tayuya not liking the ring. I set aside all the pay I've been getting in the last 3 months. Tayuya blinked in surprise. That was over 40 A-rank missions and more than a few S-ranked ones as well. It was no wonder the ring was of such high quality, its price must have been extortionate. I just went into the shop and asked what I could get for it. The man just seemed really surprised and told me there was only one ring I could buy for that amount. Sorry if it isn't enough. Tayuya was ignoring the blonde at this point as she slipped the ring onto her finger with care. It fit her perfectly and she wondered how Naruto had managed to get the size right, not that she really cared. She looked up at him, seeing that he was still rambling nervously, before tackling him to the floor, this time the one to plant kisses all over him. When she finally got up she was grinning like crazy, almost at Naruto levels, which was rather scary, although Naruto didn't mind in the slightest. So you like it? Tayuya just laughed out loud before settling for a soft and gentle smile. Yeah, I like it. Naruto beamed happily as he picked up Tayuya in his arms, surprising the red-headed Kanoiki again. Great, let's go tell Gaara. Tayuya just nodded with a devious smile. She couldn't wait for Matsuri to see her ring. The girl was going to be so jealous. Anko skipped through the streets of Konoha with what some people might call a slightly manic grin. She made sure to direct this look on anybody and everybody who crossed her path. She was definitely in a good mood today. She didn't really know why. It might have been the recent slew of interesting A-ranked missions she had been getting, or perhaps it was because Hana had asked her to be her maid of honor. She didn't really care. All she knew was that she was happy. Those occurrences were too rare in her book to be wasted pondering. Her grin diminished slightly as she looked up at the Hokage monument, noticing a lone figure standing atop the head of the Yondaime Hokage. She couldn't make out any features except the long billowing coat they wore because the sun was behind them, making the Junin cover her eyes with a hand. For a moment she could have sworn the man was smirking in her direction, but before she could get any closer he vanished, just like that. In that brief instant she swore she could have seen a mop of sun-kissed blonde hair. She shook her head, wondering if she had been out in the sun for too long before remembering what she was doing. Her grin returning, she quickly took off in the direction of the Inuzuka compound. It wasn't every day she got to be a bridesmaid to her best friend. May sighed as she leafed through another stack of documents idly, not really focused on what she was reading. It was mostly senseless drivel about this mission or that. She didn't care too much as long as they were completed successfully without many problems. She groaned as she leaned back in the chair. She really needed a day off or something. The last time she had been able to really kick back and just enjoy herself was at Naruto's wedding. She smiled as she remembered the day fondly. She peered out over the village, her village, watching the sun reflect off the moisture covering the whitewashed buildings. She peered a little closer as she noticed a single man standing tall, high up on one of the buildings, just looking out over the village. She couldn't make out any details, but he definitely caught her eye with his clothing blowing out in the wind like that. As quickly as she had noticed him, a cloud passed over the sun, briefly darkening the village for just a moment. When it passed, he was gone, as if he had never been there in the first place. May just blinked as she leaned back even further into her chair. She really needed a break. Yugito slid underneath another of B's attacks, bringing her body down low to the ground before springing back up to wrap around the larger man's neck. She was swiftly backhanded away before doing any actual damage, but before he could fully recover she was on him again, a flurry of lightning-fast punches and kicks. B dodged or parried all of it with the face of one of his swords before grabbing one of Yugito's overextended arms, quickly throwing her across the plateau to impact painfully with a boulder. You gotta be faster than that, little miss, too, or the mighty Killer Bee will always beat you, yeah. The blonde just stood up with a smirk on her face before both Jinchuriki raised an eyebrow, turning their heads to where they felt a familiar chakra signature. Both smirked lightly as they gazed up at the mountain they were training under, just catching a glimpse of red and yellow before it vanished, taking the familiar presence with it. So it's that time of the year again, huh? B just nodded with a small smile, his arms over his chest as he looked up from behind his shades. It would seem it's that time for Lil. 9. He was cut off before he could rap anymore as Yugito promptly kicked him across the training ground. Gotta keep your guard up, B-sensei. A lone figure suddenly materialized atop a rooftop deep in Earth Country, standing easily with their arms crossed over their chest. Their eyes narrowed briefly before softening as they took into the night above them, the stars shining in the cloudless sky. They sighed to themselves as they took in Awagakur, harnessing its own rugged beauty with its rough-hewn buildings. It wasn't their favorite village of all time, but ever since Unoki had passed on the title of Tsuchikage it had become more tolerable, dropping its inherent hatred for Konoha and its allies, slightly. Two Chunin were out on the late shift, patrolled through the streets, boredom evident on their faces. It was the most pointless job in the elemental nations. The walls of Awagakur were unbreachable, almost. In the history of the continent only one man had ever breached the city, and he was dead. One of them suddenly stopped, the cigarette in his mouth dropping to the ground as his mouth opened in surprise, pointing up at a rooftop. Hey, isn't that? His friend looked around, noticing his friend trail off with an apathetic indifference. He just wanted the night to end. He didn't see anything up on the roof, so just quickly slapped his partner around the back of his head before walking on down the street. Shut up, you moron. Who the hell's gonna be out here at this time of night? You're probably just tired. The other Chunin just blinked as he scrutinized the spot again. He was sure he had seen somebody, and not just anybody. He shook his head. It must have just been exhaustion and boredom. There was no way it could be him anyway, no way. Kakashi jumped through the trees, only stopping when he finally came to the edge of the training ground. He was about to jump down until he spotted somebody else standing in his usual spot. Instantly he recognized the long red coat and bright, spiky blonde hair. He paused for a moment before turning around. He wouldn't want to interrupt somebody paying their respects. He could come back later. He chuckled, thinking it might be worth it to see the shock on people's faces when he actually showed up on time for once. Naruto just stared down at the simple black polished stone in front of him, the smallest of smiles on his face. He knelt down, placing the handful of flowers that he had collected from all across the elemental nations down on the memorial, focusing on 3 names in particular. He closed his eyes, breathing in deeply for a moment before he felt a hand lightly rest on his shoulders. He stood back, up, turning around to see his wife looking sadly down at the memorial. Come on, Naruto, time to come home. The blonde just nodded with a sad smile as Tayuya wrapped her arms around him in a warm hug. They both disappeared, vanishing in an instant, the flowers resting on the polished black marble being the only indicator they were even there. Naruto and Tayuya reappeared inside their home, still wrapped up in each other's arms until they heard a cough behind them. Naruto turned his head with a smirk as he saw Fu staring at the two of them, her arms under her chest, crossed over her Junin jacket. Good to see you back, Onisan, you know they were worried about you. As if on cue, Naruto spotted a blur of blonde suddenly run into the room, bowling him back as the yellow bullet crashed into him. To-san. Naruto just chuckled as he stood back up, picking up his daughter as he did so. Hey Konan-chan, you know you're getting a little old to be jumping into me like that. The 4-year-old just giggled as she wrapped her arms around her father's neck, shaking her head furiously. Nah, To-san will always be there to pick me up. Naruto just chuckled but nodded all the same. Who was he to say no to his little girl? He was right though, she was starting to get a little big, only 4 years old and already she was becoming awkward to hold the way he used to. Her long, straight blonde hair fell in sheets around her rounded face, always trying to emulate her mother. The 3 whisker marks on either cheek however marked her as her father's little girl. PFF, you know you're going to have to get her out of that fucking habit sooner or later. Naruto just turned around to the doorway with an amused expression, his eyebrow raised at his son. He didn't have to say anything though as Tayuya was quickly behind the 8-year-old, slapping around the back of the head. Arashi Uzumaki, you swear one more fucking time and I'll get Fu to fly you up so high you won't be able to see the clouds. The boy turned pale before he coughed nervously, grumbling under his breath about hypocritical mothers. Naruto just smirked at the scene. It was the same thing almost every day. He was never happier than the day Arashi had been born, inheriting his father's spiky hair and his mother's color. However, like his sister, the 3 whisker marks on either cheek clearly display his heritage to the world. Hey To-san, you know when Nagato Ajisan is next coming over? He promised me he'd teach me some awesome technique. Naruto chuckled. He swore if Konan didn't keep his cousin on a tight leash he would spoil Arashi rotten, something to do with being a true Uzumaki, which always made Naruto grumble. No idea, take it up with your aunt. Arashi smirked, nodding before he went back outside, no doubt to train. He had been trying to replicate the Rasengan for a few days now and of course Naruto was no help, not wanting to ruin the feeling of working out a jutsu all on his own. He had caught Fu trying to give him pointers once but he quickly sent her packing to Yukimaru for a while. If it involved training or jutsu, Arashi was all over it, yet at the same time he seemed to have taken up his mother's love of music with a righteous passion, which was unfortunate when he would spend all night practicing. He carefully set Konan down, much to her displeasure if her pouting features were anything to go on. It was lucky that he had slowly grown immune to what he had lovingly dubbed the puppy dog eyes jutsu, thanks to Tayuya abusing it during her first pregnancy. Naruto suddenly shivered as he remembered back to those times. Sure, Tayuya was possibly happier than he had ever seen her, but she had moments, and that was all Naruto was willing to remember. Hey To-san, why are you always gone this time every year? Naruto looked down at his daughter in mild surprise. For once a young she was certainly turning out to be shrewd. He wondered briefly if she got that from her grandfather but dismissed it as he knelt down. I was just visiting some very special people. Konan smiled brightly, a sight that would prove irresistible to even the most hardened of shinobi. Can I visit him too? Naruto smiled right back as he ruffled the top of her hair gently. Sure thing, but not right now, when you're older. Konan just grinned and nodded while Naruto chuckled. That was definitely one difference between his kids. Arashi would fight him tooth and nail over every little point, as stubborn as his mother, while Konan would accept everything Naruto said, not that he lied to her or anything. He made sure that he never lied to his children about anything. He wouldn't have them growing up the way he did. Unless of course it was an awkward question, then he would pass it off to Tayuya before vanishing for a few days with Gaara. He smiled as he thought of his friend. There was one who had taken to married life well, or at least Matsuri had made him take to it well. Arashi and Kin were best friends and outside of the academy the pair were inseparable. If it kept up this way he was going to have to recommend they be placed on the same genin team. He was sure Gaara would agree. After all, besides Matsuri he always took Naruto's opinions into consideration. Then again he figured that was how it was supposed to be between Junin commanders and their cage. He watched as Conan ran off out the back door. She enjoyed watching Arashi train, knowing that it would be her as well one day. Naruto just stood back up, watching her run off with a smile as Fu walked over, leaning back against the edge of a table. So how was Iwa? Any trouble from Kuretsuki? Naruto just smirked, finally tearing his gaze away from his daughter to look at his sister. She too had changed over the years. She was definitely taller, curvier too, although Naruto didn't generally like to think about her that way. She had let her hair grow out a bit, still trying to make it spiky like his, mostly unsuccessfully. It was almost a rare sight now to not see her flying through the village, swerving in between buildings. Nah, I don't think anybody even saw me. And even if they did, you know they wouldn't give me any trouble. Tayuya just smirked from behind him as she draped herself over his back. Yeah, benefits of having a flea on site order directly from the Tsuchikage. Naruto just chuckled. He didn't even know why he had that on his bingo book profile. All those talks with Unoki to prove that he wasn't his father and his granddaughter turns out to be exactly the same. Fu smiled as well, rolling her neck back and forth. Playing nanny to Naruto's kids was fun, but tiring. Yeah, being the second man to ever receive an SS ranking might help just a little as well. Naruto just smiled and nodded. That had certainly been a surprise when he saw it. It also made him feel a little bit proud. He felt as though he was at least living up to his father's reputation, while at the same time he kind of hoped he wasn't casting too much of a shadow for his own son to follow in. He shrugged it off. He was training his son himself, and one day he knew Arashi would surpass him as well. At least until then he could enjoy beating his son around the training field, all in good sport of course. Well, it's been a long day, so. Fu just nodded kindly. Yeah, I better get back to Yukimaru anyway. Naruto waved her away as she took off into fading sunlight, quickly lost amongst the twinkling stars. He felt a tug on his hand and looked around to see Tayuya grinning at him deviously. I hope you aren't too tired. I have plans, you know. A large grin broke out over Naruto's features as he swiftly picked his wife up bridal style, immediately flashing to their room before carefully laying her out on their bed. She just smiled seductively, twiddling a strand of hair between her fingers in a way she knew drove him mad. As if to punctuate that point, Naruto quickly dived on her, shedding his coat as he did so. Tayuya quickly got the message and began to pull off her own clothes, helped by Naruto where he could, and soon the two of them were lying next to each other completely naked as Naruto began trailing soft kisses across Tayuya's body. The redhead could only moan her approval, at least after checking that the privacy seals were up. Naruto took her groans of pleasure as a sign his ministrations were working and grinned as he continued to play with her nipple in between his teeth. He was about to stray lower when Tayuya grabbed his head, bringing him back up to face him as she planted a heated kiss on his lips. Not tonight, shithead, I need you right now. Naruto just smiled warmly, nodding as he readjusted his body, lining them up together. Tayuya gasped as she felt him slide inside her but quickly adjusted and began to move with him, getting the most out of his thrusts. Naruto continued to kiss her when he could, on the lips, on her shoulder, just over the small blue diamond next to the spiral seal on her neck, a wedding gift from Tsunade. Finally Tayuya screamed out, unable to hold it back any longer. She clamped down around Naruto as he groaned in sync with her cry. They released together, both left panting on the bed, wrapped in each other's arms. Naruto continued to plant light, fluttering kisses across his wife's body while Tayuya tried to get her mind back from her post-orgasmic haze. Finally her vision cleared and she could look across at her husband with a smile. Happy birthday, shithead. The blonde just smiled as he fell back onto the comfortable bed, sighing happily. His life was just the way he always wanted it. He had a family, he had respect, he had a great friend, and best of all he had the woman he loved lying next to him, sweaty, but beautiful. He sat up quickly when he heard a knock on their bedroom door, frowning as he got up and threw on a robe. The Anbu knew better than to see him for anything less than an emergency today. Even so, he sighed and walked over. His eyebrow raised in surprise when he looked down at a mane of long blonde hair before his daughter looked up at him with her piercing green eyes. I couldn't get to sleep. Naruto just smiled kindly down at her as he took her small hand, leading her into the room where Tayuya just watched the scene with amusement. Was it the man in the orange mask again? Conan just nodded, making Naruto sigh. He regretted telling her that story now. He should have known it would give her nightmares. All right, you can sleep with us tonight. Conan just gave him the biggest smile as she immediately shot across the room so fast he feared she had somehow figured out his Fujin no Iki. Tayuya just laughed as she quickly pulled the daughter into a hug, after making sure she was clothed of course, wrapping up the little blonde with the bed covers. You know, I think you just make up these nightmares so you can sleep with Ka-san and Tu-san. Conan shook her head quickly, but both Naruto and Tayuya caught the small blush that found its way onto the bridge of her nose. Naruto just shrugged as he flashed over the bed, making his daughter giggle as he vanished, only to reappear behind her. Well, I don't mind, it just means I get to spend more time with my little girl. Conan beamed before snuggling in between her parents, looking up at them both with wide eyes. Can you tell me a story? Naruto looked across at Tayuya, who simply shrugged, giving him a look that clearly said, it's your turn. He sighed internally but masked it with a kind smile as he pulled Conan in closer to him with one arm around the young girl's shoulders. You didn't always live in the sand village. Naruto just shook his head with an understanding smile. Are you going to let me tell the story? The younger blonde quickly quietened down as she got more comfortable. Well, you see, one day I was running. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.